Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Morehouse College, our president, Dr. John Sylvanus Wilson, and Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter, Dean of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel, I am pleased to call the roll of inductees. Launched in 2015, the College of Pastoral Leadership is the newest program of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel that advances its mission to develop ambassadors of peace for the beloved world community. Funded by the Lilly Endowment Incorporated, the College of Pastoral Leadership builds on the chapel's 37-year legacy of ecumenical, spiritual, and vocational education to provide a year-long professional development program for early career church leaders. We are proud to recognize 4 Morehouse students, aspiring pastoral leaders, who participated in this year's program. Gentlemen, please stand as I call your names, and I ask the audience to hold your applause until all have stood. Devin Jerome Crawford. Arik Bernard Fleming Jr. Darian Jamel Jones. Japaris Xavier Key. For the past 30 years, the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel has recognized men and women from around the world whose lives and works seek to honor the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We are pleased today to continue this tradition as we induct the following exemplars into the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers, Board of Sponsors, and Collegium of Scholars. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as I call your name. And again, if you would hold your applause until after all names are called, we would appreciate it. Murad Abdullah. James Lincoln Brewer Calvert. Charles Weldon Brooks Sr. Stefan Germain Brooks. Don Darius Butler. Ira Edwards Jr. Kim David Agar. James David Gaillard. Johann Galtung. Charles L. Gill. Raymond Gilpin. Samuel L. Green, Jr. Gregory Gerald McKinley Ingram. Mark D. Johnson. Colin Adair Jones. Shannon Elizabeth Carafunda. David Townsend Lewicki. Clarence Terrell Martin. Tyrone Emmanuel McGowan, Jr. William Robert McFall, Sr. Anne Marie Mingo. Nathan A. Russell, Grace C. Washington. Congratulations to you all.
Please remain standing. In your program, 5 pages from the back, please find the charge. Five pages from the back, you will find the charge for this morning. You may follow along, and I will read out loud. The Morehouse College religious tradition was founded by William Jefferson White in 1867 and was greatly enhanced by Henry Lyman Morehouse, Charles Thomas Walker, John Hope, and Adam Daniel Williams. It reached its zenith during the tenure of Benjamin Elijah Mays. Strong, learned leadership came from Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, Howard Washington Thurman, Floyd McKissick, Samuel Woodrow Williams, Charles Radford Lawrence, Martin Luther King Sr. and Jr., and Thomas Kilgore Jr. Because the crisis of character education and character values in America require more ethically and spiritually oriented role models and moral examples, I am pleased to induct you into the Morehouse College prophetic religious tradition. The Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers, Board of Sponsors, Collegium of Scholars, and College of Pastoral Leadership, and do hereby charge and challenge you to be affirmative, appreciative, coherently critical, and engaged examples for this generation of students, always remembering that our vision is the creation of an inclusive, global, dignitarian society in which the full development of each individual's potential is the central goal. I charge you to be faithful servant, scholar, adaptive leaders, guarantors of continuity, celebrators of change, negotiators of structure, facilitators of meaning, practitioners of cosmopolitan ethics, and co-creators of the beloved world community, with the hope that we can right age-old wrongs that continue to haunt the American people in the world and the world. Lastly, I charge you to use your time, talent, tender, and technology to help usher in an age of peace and nonviolence for the children of the world, to raise another generation of ethically inspired leaders committed to building the beloved world community, in token of which you are now given these citations, which list 20 global ethical principles by which Dr. King and many Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Sikhs, and scientists live their lives, and transform the world. Testifying to this investiture, and in witness whereof, under the seals of the college and the chapel, the signatures of duly authorized officers are hereunto affixed, this 31st day of March, 2016. Par Dominum Nostrum Jesum Christum. League Club members, you may now distribute the citations.
As the Glee Club distributes the citations, I would like to read the inductees in the inaugural class of the College of Pastoral Leadership. 8 senior pastors from across the country who have evidenced their commitment to learn, live, and lead the ideals of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as they embrace their call to serve their churches and communities as 21st century moral, cosmopolitan pastor leaders. Please stand, gentlemen and ladies, as I call your name. Sharad Hosseini Kriesman, Brandon Crowley, Gregory James Edwards, Charles Leonard Fisher III, William Terry Ladd, Yvette Denise Massey, Darrell Dewan Roberts, Craig Thomas Robinson. Please give all a hand at this time.
Good morning. It is my privilege and pleasure to introduce our Crown Forum speaker this morning, Dr. Johann Galtung. Dr. Galtung's presence with us today is particularly appropriate. Hailed as the founder of the discipline of peace studies, his work aligns closely with our efforts here at Morehouse College to promote the cause of peace around the world. Morehouse, under the leadership of Dr. Gregory O. Hall, Chair of the Department of Political Science, and in partnership with Dean Carter of our own King Chapel, has established a Peace Studies Certificate program. Dr. Galtung, a mathematician, sociologist, and political scientist, is founder of the International Peace Research Institute in Oslo, Norway, the world's first academic research center focused on peace studies, as well as the influential Journal of Peace Research. Through his personal and professional commitment to fostering peace, Dr. Galtung has helped found 500 peace centers around the world and has served as professor, mediator, researcher, and author. We are deeply honored to have with us someone who has inspired and continues to inspire so many to dedicate their lives to the promotion of peace and the satisfaction of basic human needs. Before I ask the Glee Club to bless us, I want to beg your pardon as I exit over here to tend to a pressing, time-sensitive matter next door. I plan to make it back shortly and enjoy the rest of the program from the rear of the chapel. We will now hear a selection from the world-renowned Morehouse College Glee Club, and then we will hear from Dr. Galtoon.
Mr. President, Mr. Dean, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an enormous honor for me to be here and address you this morning and be the recipient of the Gandhi King Ikeda Award. I have been a professor at 5 universities in the United States, Columbia, Princeton, and so on. Finally, I came to the major place. High time. But let me tease you a little bit. I'm extremely impressed, among many other things, with your punctuality. The only thing not punctual that I have found is the clock behind you. It happens to be 1 hour late. Will somebody please take note of that? Having said that, you are operating with 3 basic mantras in connection with this award. Community building. How ought we treat each other? Very important. And from dominion to dignity. That is the speech already written. There are two communities in the world that I'm going to talk about. The first one is among people. Human beings, or as I often prefer to call us, changing English a little bit. Not human beings, but human becomings. Because we are potentially growing all the time. We are in a process. So, Oxford English Dictionary, will you be so kind and take note of that one? Now, the second community is the community of states. There happen to be right now 193 members of the United Nations. There are about 7 more not recognized. In other words, 200. There are about 2,000 nations. A nation is a cultural group with attachment to a territory. Plenty of problems in that one. So the question is exactly, how do we build communities? How do we do it? And I'll be, in a sense, sharing with you my mediation experience. How do I try to do it? But let me start with the worst possible case. The worst possible case is that we see the positive in ourselves and the negative in others. If we go very far seeing the positive in ourselves, we become narcissistic. It becomes a case of self-love. If we see only the negative in others, we become paranoid. And instead of peace studies, we get security studies, which is an academic potpourri centered on paranoia. If you now combine narcissism with paranoia, you have the psychiatric diagnosis for psychopathology. Now, this is serious. There could be states that operate like that. There could be. That only see the good in themselves, even to the point of defining themselves as exceptional. And only see the negative in others, only see them as threats. What do we do about that? Maybe we have to move a little bit to the east, because Western thinking is very much based on good versus bad, positive versus negative, right versus wrong, true versus false, and so on. And with the Latin tertium non datur, there is no third possibility. Well, let us move 20,000 kilometers or 15,000 and we come to China. They also talk about good and bad, positive, negative. But then they have a little trick. It's called yin-yang. And the point about yin-yang is the yin and the yang in the yin, and the yin and the yang in the yang, and the yin and the yang in the yin, and the yin and the yang in the yang in the yang, and so on. It becomes a little bit more complicated now. Let us just do with 2 of them. The positive in the positive and the negative in the positive. The positive in the negative and the negative in the negative. And you have a little bit richer way of thinking. How do you apply it to the smallest community there is, which is not 2 people? The smallest community is 1 person. You and yourself. 1 person. You with yourself. Well, it might be a good idea simply to start understanding better the positive in you and the negative in you. Have a look at yourself. Gnotise auton, the Greeks said, know yourself. Know yourself. And you try to reduce the negative and you try to build on the positive. Then you look around the world and you find others. Try to identify the positive in them and the negative in them. You'll find both. I'll give you examples very soon. But the point about it is that if you start looking, you will find both. Now imagine now that you have a couple, a marriage on the rocks. And they both have become specialists in seeing the negative of the other. It's not a very good marriage. It's a very bad one. And it is bad for both parties. They may enjoy the quarrels to some extent, and they might try to find some more negative point in the other to fire the final shot or something like that. Imagine that you switch to seeing the positive in the other. Imagine that you do that. But at the same time, you do a little thing. You keep the negative in the back of your mind. You don't deny its existence. And you ask yourself, how could we, by playing on the two positives, go further? Now, there you have already a very important point in mediation. So let us say that I'm mediating a marriage on the rocks, and the story I'm telling you now is a true story. As a matter of fact, all I say is truth, but something maybe even more true than something else. So you have that couple. She's a Buddhist. He's a salesman of bicycles. They happen to live in Germany, but the story has nothing to do with Germany. I'm asked by a friend to try to help them. And the friend says they have been quarreling for 10 years. She has a lover. He has a mistress. And it's on the rocks, not only on the rocks. And it looks like they're split up, but they're very good people. So I follow my basic rule when I'm mediating. One at a time, never together. That comes later when the time is ripe for it. One at a time. I talk with both of them, and you know already what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to identify the negative and the positive. I find in the Buddhist wife self-righteousness. I have seen the truth and you haven't. I find in the Buddhist wife deep meditation, deep capacity for practicing Buddhism. I find in the salesman quite a lot of concern with money and the kind of material goods that money can bring. Much love for that. Let us call it the bourgeois way of life, BWL. And it is with great sorrow he sees that his wife is departing from that one and no longer a normal wife. She's become esoteric. But then there's something else. A very talented businessman. His accounting books are in good order. He has the bad habit of bringing them to the dining table. Which is not a good idea if your wife is a Buddhist and rejects outer wealth and goes for inner wealth only. Not a good idea. Remember that next time you bring your accounting books. Now, they're written in black figures. It's a small business, and he's doing it well. So I am then sitting there as a mediator, and I want to help them. So how do I do that? I try to design a project linking good and good, positive and positive. And in order to do that, and sooner or later, gently, tactfully proposing it to them, not imposing, but proposing. Not posing too much, and only pro, not im. How do I do that? Well, this is where a basic point in mediation comes in, the difficult point. It's not difficult to have dialogues with them and ask them what I stand for and so on. The difficult point is the creativity. Creativity. What I have to do is to design a project that could link positive with positive. Now, I can tell you this. The first 20 times are the difficult ones. After that, you start getting the knack of it. Positive with positive, good with good. But I am going to propose. I'm not going to impose. And I am not so naive, I have a little bit experience, that if I can only manage to have them talk gently to each other, they will get the idea themselves. It's not my experience. People know too little. They know too little about possibilities. Could you possibly imagine thinking in terms of running a bookstore for Buddhist books together? You get the point. I'm playing up to the good businessman and to the dedicated Buddhist. I'm talking one-on-one. The wife says, fantastic. The husband says, fantastic. I bring them together. They're jumping up in the air. They're embracing me. And they're saying, why didn't we get that idea? Let me just add to you, this was 20 years ago. The bookstore still exists. And I said, well, maybe we were too busy. It's called polarization. It's called conflict behavior and attitude. Maybe you were too busily focusing on the negative and trying to fire some shots at each other. And nobody had ever taught you linking good and good. It's not in your culture. It's not in your culture. I mean, we talk about peace culture. That would be a rather basic aspect. And I would recommend that you put 50% capital to start with, 50-50, on a symmetric basis. They so did, and after 1 week the following happened. She started doing accounting, which she, as a Buddhist, had never thought she would do. But you know, when your own money is in it, you start getting interested in how many books did we sell and so on. He did something he had never thought he would do in his life. He read the Buddhist book. In other words, two small inner revolutions were taking place, and this is the general experience. If you manage to link good and good, positive and positive, it has a deep impact on the parties. But now be careful. Notice one point. When you have violence, it's because there is an unsolved conflict or trauma somewhere. Violence is the smoke. The unsolved conflict, the unconciled trauma, is the fire. There is something called journalism. They are smoke specialists. They are not able to identify the underlying things. They are reporting smoke. We need better journalists, but that is just a side remark. Could be a very important task for Morehouse College to contribute to that. Peace journalism, where you always emphasize the possible solutions. Now, having said that, we have already come very, very far. But the vision has to be compelling. And it has to indicate to them that if you practice this, you will not only get what you are asking for, you continue being a Buddhist, you continue being a salesman, but you will get more in addition. You will get something additional. But at the same time, I could add a remark. Before I met you, you have had 10 nasty years, you understand? You have said a couple of not very kind things. Now I give you a little piece of advice. Try to get this bookstore running. And when you feel it's running okay, time may have come to go back to the past and maybe apologize for a couple of things on both sides. But you don't start at that point. You start linking positive and positive. I've gone into some detail with that one. Let me now take the community of states. We have today in the world 8 big units. Russia, India, China, OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Those 4 are so-called emerging. Then we have 2 in the West that have run the game for some time. United States of America and the European Union. When somebody else is emerging, relatively speaking, they are declining. Then we have 2 more, Latin America, traditionally very dependent on Anglo-America. And we have, of course, Africa, traditionally very dependent on the colonizing powers. In the European Union has 28 members. The 11 colonizing powers are all members of the European Union, but they're all from Western Europe. So don't think that countries in Eastern Europe are too enthusiastic to receive the refugees created by Western Europe. If you think that, you haven't quite understood what life is about. So you have 8. 8 by 7 is 56, divided by 2 is 28. You have 28 bilateral relations. How would linking positive with positive look? Let me start with an example that does not involve the United States. Let us start with India and China. They happen to be the most populous countries in the world. They are neighbors. They have remarkably, actually, I won't say good relations, positive relations, but they don't have negative relations. They have recently only had a very short war that was started by India, October 1962, and the response by China was devastating for India. But that's very little. What would it look like linking positive with positive? Well, first you have to know what's the positive and negative. If I should look at India, I would say immediately the negative is the caste system, and the positive is much less known, the community system. Horizontal. Indians from the same caste and subcaste relate extremely well to each other. They travel in India, and they find a hotel which speaks to their subcaste, and that's where they settle. Extremely well. In other words, there is a horrible prejudice discrimination built into caste, and at the same time a fantastic capacity for peace building, community building, exactly your word. How about China? Well, the negative aspect, its bigness, its size, but that's not what I'm focusing on. The negative aspect for me is its China-centeredness, its profound, big egoism. I'm not pointing to what is called in the United States the Communist Party, authoritarian dictatorship. Yes, they have that. But I could say that the United States has a two-party dictatorship, and we will see how that works now in the famous nomination process. Watch a little bit the instruction to the delegates at the second voting, and we will see a little bit about it. We know about superdelegates, super PACs, and all of that, and we will see how DNC and RNC are cooperating to make the one-party system, divide, split into two, operating. So let's be a little bit careful when it comes to that one. Now it's the Chinese egoism with an enormous ego, the China-centeredness. The positive aspect, if I should point to one very important one, is what they try to do today. It is China-centered, but it is at the disposal of the world. The so-called Belt and Road, the Silk Roads. But they are not only Silk Roads, they are Silk Railroads, Silk Flights, Silk Lanes, Silk Boats, Silk Ships, silky all the time. They are spinning all of us into a silky cocoon, you may say. All of us? No, because they do it mainly on land, and doing it on land, they reach Europe, all parts of it, and Africa. They don't reach the American hemisphere. They don't reach Anglo-America, which has always built its security on the safety of two big oceans. We have a problem there. They have been able to handle their economy by lifting the bottom up. So maybe that is the positive I would gamble on. From 1991 to 2014, they were able to improve the living standard of 400 million people, according to the World Bank, from misery in the countryside to what came out of it? Lower middle class standard of living. Now, this is quite something. You can now test your knowledge of China and the quality of your media by asking yourself, did I know this? If the answer is no, you know whom to address about it. Now, China could learn, could teach, to start with that one, India how to lift the bottom up. There are 5 very concrete tricks they made use of. Don't have time for that. India could teach, Horizon could teach, a very important point. Federalism inside the country, building positive relations, using the community, horizontal community ties I mentioned, dividing India into something like 33 units. Northeast India they still haven't managed, but by and large a fantastic success. That will give much more autonomy to the Tibetans, to the Uyghurs, to the Inner Mongolians. But it will also find some very soft way of linking Taiwan, the same way as they've been linking Macau and Hong Kong, to the major part of China. They have a lot to teach each other, a lot to learn from each other. The United States could sit down together with Cuba from Latin America. How do you, with so little money or actually no money at all, produce a life expectancy and an infant survival rate better than in Washington, D.C.? And the answer would partly be exactly because you saw to it that we didn't have enough money. We used some other ways of doing it. And the United States could teach Cuba not the weakness of the U.S., which is the empire, the dominion, but the dignity that comes by giving freedom to everybody. Now, how that freedom is used can build more dominion. There's a problem. Bernie Sanders addresses that problem. The others do not really do it. I had just given you the name of my candidate, but anyhow, that's the point. Having said that, which is, of course, my personal taste, but it comes out of what I'm saying, lifting the bottom up. They got a 58% increase in domestic demand by lifting the bottom up and were able to weather the 2008 crisis. United States did exactly the opposite. They made the bottom sink even deeper down. And they made the bottom come up to the top 70%. Some say 99, I find that a little bit exaggerated, but that the top 1% has disproportionately much, we know. The new word for war is inequality. Something has to be done about it. United States, sit down with Cuba to get some tricks about health. Sit down with China to learn the 5 tricks. But at the same time, tell China, don't be so afraid of freedom. Don't be that. Maybe that electioneering in a country with 1.35 billion inhabitants is not so easy. It's not so easy with 315 million either. But try to make the best of it. I would like to see those dialogues in the open, you see, so that we could all participate in it, and we would all benefit from it. I repeat to conclude. Identify the positive and the negative in yourself. Try to improve yourself. Identify it in all others, be they people, be they states. Link positive with positive. But keep in the back of your mind that there is something negative. Don't be so naive that you think the world only consists of positives, but push the positive up front. Thank you so much. For the information of the person in charge of the clock, it's now 11:48. Thank you.
One announcement and then the singing of the college hymn. The announcement: Doctors Otis Moss Jr. and Otis Moss III, classes of 56 and 92, will be in public conversation this afternoon, beginning at 5 o'clock in the Bank of America auditorium. The theme, Generation to Generation, Who's Got Next? All are invited. Won't you please rise for the singing of the college hymn, which is found on the page adjacent to the charge. Please rise.